Good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Chittenden Solid Waste District. I want to point out we do not have a quorum present, and therefore we will not be taking any action on any items that appear in the agenda. I'm advised that we can have an informational meeting and discussion of items, but no action of any type can be taken. And in the interests of the commissioners and potentially any members of the public who might later view this recording of this meeting, we're going to proceed. I'm going to try to be clear as to how we are proceeding. A packet was sent out. There is an agenda. Not asked for an agenda to be accepted because, again, we don't have a quorum. I think similarly, there is no need for a public comment period because we do not have a quorum, and so any address to the board would be it wouldn't be informational, binding, or I guess necessarily appropriate. So I don't believe there are any members of the public present, but if you were, I would ask you to return at the next meeting to address the board. Third item on the agenda is a consent agenda. We cannot take any action on that, so approval of the consent agenda items will be deferred until the next meeting. We can move on then to item number 4.
Can I ask if anybody had any questions? I mean, either can, just as an informational thing, that would be appropriate to have a discussion if anyone.
Sure, I think that's, yeah, it's informational. Are there any questions about any items on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Leslie has a question.
Yes, Leslie, go ahead.
On the executive director report, if I remember correctly, because I don't have it open in front of me, I apologize for that, but at the time I read it, I was looking for an update on the question of the location of a new MRF. And I don't feel like the report gave us any more information than we'd had prior to. Is there anything more to report?
Right, so that would be covered under executive session because it would be related to real estate transactions.
Okay, so there is there is a development that might be subject to board action. Is that fair to say? There are
No.
developments?
There was no, on the agenda, there is no action scheduled for coming out of executive session. So the executive session was going to be an update and information only regarding topic to date on the potential for real estate transactions. But there's no action scheduled to come out of executive session.
Okay, let me just state it in a way that, so I'm sure I understand what you're saying. That any information that you would have been providing regarding the new MRF would have to have been discussed in executive session.
Correct, because it's related to real estate
I just
transactions.
want to make sure that I understood in my own words. Thank you.
Yeah, correct.
Any other questions about items on the consent agenda? Again, you'll have the opportunity the next time we meet with a quorum present to ask any other questions. I'm hearing none. Leslie, your
Sorry.
hand's still up. I think you're
I thought I
satisfied.
clicked it.
Very good.
Are you able to change the view to gallery rather than speaker? Thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on to item that listed in the agenda as item number 4, staff introduction. Turn it over to Sarah to introduce one of the newest members of our CSWD staff.
So I want to introduce Joey Catania. Joey is our new compliance and safety manager. Joey started about 3 weeks ago. He comes to us most recently from UVM, working in the compliance arena there, and also prior to that had worked in New York in the city for compliance issues with the bar association there. So working with lawyers on making sure that they were complying with the requisite needs to be a lawyer in New York. So what Joey is doing is leading a mighty team of 2. So Joey and Ethan are our compliance team, And when we were talking about kind of what the focus, we wanted the focus of the work to be, it really was on getting out into the community and talking to folks, learning about, any barriers that people may be having, particularly in the business community, regarding complying with state mandates and CSWD's ordinances. But so I said to Joey, I'd like you to take this year and really get to know folks in Chittenden County, get to know businesses and schools and everyone who's kind of subject to what we do, and to be present as a resource to that community. So he's been out, I think, every day, pretty much, since joining, learning about what we do and learning about the different areas that we're focusing on. And we're thrilled to have someone who's, again, dedicated to this area. This has been something that the board has been also looking for a while, to have some more focus on compliance. And so this is the next step in those plans. So I want to welcome Joey and let you all know that is we're here and we're taking a stronger look. And the other change too is compliance had been a standalone program with direct relationship, direct reporting to me. We've moved that to administration. So Joey reports to Amy as the director of administration. So it's actually a team of 3. Joey and Ethan are directly responsible for compliance and safety with oversight from Amy, and then also oversight from, general oversight and guidance from me. So say welcome to Joey. Welcome. And here's the new person. So any questions that you may have regarding the program, you can certainly direct Joey or to Amy. And yeah, any questions?
Oh, we're really glad to have you on board. Love the hat.
Thank you.
If you can't see it on Zoom, CSWD.
Mhm.
Beautiful hat. It's always nice to have a face and a name put together. So we look forward to the work that you can do for the district. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else that Sarah may have missed about you that feel free to share, or any other comments after your 3 weeks.
Very excited to be here. Great staff so far. I think I've met everyone. And yeah, just looking forward to getting out there and doing the work.
Great. Well, appreciate you coming out tonight. And coming to meet the board in person and again on Zoom. So
Yeah.
you're welcome to stay to hear the rest of this,
I
be present for this abbreviated meeting.
Yeah.
Great. And again, welcome. Moving on, item number 5, FY 24 unaudited financials. Sarah.
So we, excuse me, plan to have a presentation to review the financials. Noel and I would like to just tweak that presentation a little bit more. I want to make sure that it's as clear as it can be, because it can be complicated. So we're going to move that presentation to next month to make sure we have enough time and again, clarity in the PowerPoint and the presentation. But we do have in the packet, they've actually been sent, excuse me, secondarily, I think from Amy yesterday, I believe, the warrant and the normal quarterly financials. I think Nola might be on the line, I believe. Yeah, okay.
She was.
So if Nola's on the line, if there are questions about the financials, we are happy to discuss. I see the memo is in there, but we wanted to have a presentation accompany the memo, just so that we were making sure that everyone is clear. And the audit report is also correct. The audit report is also included in the packet. The audit report was reviewed by the Finance Committee at their last meeting as well.
Yeah, just a further comment on the audit report. It's a lot of dense financial information, and I specifically asked Sarah to note that it had been reviewed by the Finance Committee. Just if you felt duty bound to wade through all of that, just to assure you, it's okay if you didn't, and that other board commissioners responsible for oversight of the finances did review this at the past Finance Committee meeting. Sometimes the packets are long and large, a lot of information. It's there because it might be of interest to you, might be important, but sometimes it's okay to just say, I can't get that deep into it. Over the years, we've had concerns about the length of the board packets, but there's a reason for it. But please don't feel guilty if you didn't wade through, especially a detailed audit report.
But we are happy to entertain any questions at all on any of the financials, just that we'll review the 24s in depth next month. But I recognize that the memo is here if you do have questions. I'm happy to chat.
Are there any questions at this point? Hearing none, then we'll move on to the main feature of the evening, which is the review of the 2023 Waste Diversion and Disposal Report. It'll be a presentation. We've got a lot of material and graphics in there, and I encourage people to ask questions throughout this presentation. Again, we're not going to take any action, but this is a great opportunity for informational purposes.
And that'll be John is going to take over. There we are. Great.
Okay, I'm there. Can you hear me? Everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to move my Zoom window over here so I'm not talking off to the side. So yeah, my pleasure to bring you the 2023 Waste Diversion Disposal Report. Notable, I looked back in our records this afternoon, and I think that the very first report we did, or at least that I have a record of, was in 1993. So this is the 30th anniversary edition.
Wow.
For any of you who've been through 30 of these, bear with us. And I know it can be a little tedious. You're watching numbers that move slowly over time, so it's not always very exciting. But I think for those of you who are maybe newer to the board or staff, it's an interesting perspective and retrospective of how disposal patterns have changed over the years and been positively impacted by our policies and actions as a district. So this just provides you an overview of the metrics we use to aid in the evaluation of our programs. I just wanted to thank Ethan Hausman, who heads up our commercial business reporting program. He does a great job of getting this voluntarily submitted information from businesses who direct market recycling or commodities that are recycled or otherwise composted and handled, not through our own facilities or processors here in the county. So we rely on them to report to us what they've been sending out to backhauling to their headquarters or out to secondary markets, and that has an impact on our numbers. And I just wanted to thank Becky, Sarah, and Jen, who all had a hand in helping me edit this report and steering me when I may have gone off on a tangent. The purpose of the report is to help evaluate how well our members are utilized in CSWD and the private sector's facilities and programs to reduce and divert their waste from the landfill. It also helps us fulfill our state reporting requirements and provides information to the district's about the district's solid waste management system for communications to the general public, media, schools, communities, organizations, etc. It provides a wealth of information that we can communicate to the public. And this report only concerns materials that are generated within Chittenden County. There's 4 essential metrics that we cover in the diversion report, and I'll just go through them quickly. The diversion rate is essentially the amount of material that we keep out of the landfill over all of the refuse generated for disposal in some manner or recycling in some manner. So that's a key metric, something that I believe we borrowed from the EPA, and many cities and states in the country report on the same statistic. The disposal rate is something that we adopted after the Agency of Natural Resources used this metric as a measure for the statewide progress in waste reduction. Our recovery rate that we report is the percent of targeted materials. So that means materials, single stream recycling materials or organics that we have targeted as divertible, and we're looking at how much of The aggregate of these materials we think we are capturing essentially for the purpose of recycling or composting. And then, of course, we look at the climate impacts of materials that we do divert from the landfill. So some of the highlights of this year's report, generation actually is down slightly in the aggregate. We had an increase in MSW tons, 1.8%, and a drop in our diversion. And I'll get to that. It seems like a steep drop, but it actually hinges on this commercial business reporting program that I mentioned earlier. Because again, it's voluntary, we sometimes will see some bumps in those numbers. And this is one of those years, I suspect the curve will smooth as we go forward in time. But just wanted to point that out, so it didn't seem like there was an aberration from our usual trends. C&D, or construction and demolition tons, remains at a historical high. The tons diverted increased by about 0.5% from last year. MSW diversion rate in general, so that's out of all MSW generated in the county, still at 51.2%, slightly lower than 2022, but it is still meeting the state standard of being over 50%. And our recovery rate for mandatory recyclables decreased very slightly for a second year. So that's one of those ones where such a small change, essentially the same as before. In looking at the details of MSW dispose, that is, when I speak of MSW, most of you, I'm sure all of you know, that's just simply what you'd consider trash generated by residential and commercial activities. That's up, as I mentioned, 1.8 tons or 1.8%, affecting our per capita rates versus slightly. Let's see, our diversion of MSW is down 12%. And that, I believe, is in large part due to some changes, both in practices of some larger individual businesses, not so much a change in their behavior in dealing with recyclables and so on, but a change in their business overall.
John?
Yes.
Alan has a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I've asked this question before, but Casella has put in the depackager.
Correct.
Do we get those tons of material that they are depackaging and taking to Addison County to put into a?
Yep. Yeah, I do get the in-district tons that are going to the depackager, and of course those that are going to our own composting facility as well. Those numbers have actually stayed relatively steady the last 2 years. And I was going to mention that we had a decline in food residuals overall, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I would expect to have seen a bump in material possibly going to the digester, but that's not something that just came up in the numbers. We did have a small drop with some of the commercial reporters, so that's part of the issue there, but not entirely. But yeah, their facility is still going strong and performing as it has.
Two other pieces of that question. The food that is provided to other programs from the stores and whatever, do we get information on that?
Yeah, that's where the commercial business reporters program really steps in. We'll get volunteer information from individual grocery chains and restaurants and breweries. So that's been very helpful. And before we had relied on an estimate from, I think it was quite some time ago, we had relied on estimates from a consultant when they put together their waste sort survey. And I think it was decided that the estimates were likely lower than reality. And I think that was the impetus for starting that program. And spending a good deal of effort contacting these businesses and organizations, trying to get as much information that they might be collecting and incorporate that into the report.
So Alan, to kind of clarify, you're asking about food donation and rescue, food rescue and donations. So, okay.
Yep, and that's included as well. I get that information from the.
And we're getting the information from the new clothing program that we're running?
Yep.
Yep, that's included too.
Certainly, yeah, through our facilities. Yep, definitely.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's see here. Now, the other issue with the food residuals declining is we, in the past, had a methodology for calculating backyard compost. Now, the state put together a waste sort and just recently published it this year. And as part of that, they had a survey of the public's behavior related to recycling and composting activities. One of the things that came out of that in the report was that not only the household rates of pounds per household being composted, but also the participation rates, as far as I could gather in our region, were considerably lower than what we had estimated in the past. Now, we're waiting on a survey of our own that's upcoming so we can validate the participation. The total amount per household composted is estimated in the state study and the EPA study that we've been relying on in the past. The difference was not huge, but it was slightly less, and then that compounded with a lower participation rate. I actually just sort of tried as artfully as I could to meet a compromise. I thought that was reasonable, given the new information and given what we had relied on in the past. But that did drop the amount of food residuals that were considered diverted in our reports. Worth noting there. We also saw a decline in paper containers and packaging. Again, commercial reporters largely accounted for this. The MRF has performed very much, their output has been very similar to what it has been in the past year. So we didn't see much of a change there, but the change in actual diversion was again due to the activities of various businesses. And we had one or two reporters that we were not able to contact. So rather than attempt to interpolate there, and this wasn't biasing the numbers very much, but rather than interpolate what I thought they might have diverted, I just left that out for this year, and hopefully we'll get more information in the following year.
John, can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah.
Leslie, go ahead and I'll ask a question of you, John.
Yep.
Yeah, John, when you talk about changes in business practices, could you give us some examples? I really don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I think, again, we try and keep the information confidential, so I don't want to show my hand completely. But there was one instance of a business where the dynamics of a digital age is changing how they do business, essentially. And so that impacted essentially the generation of material that they have had in the past, and thus diversion.
Well, honestly, if technology is changing the patterns of use and disposal, I think that's something important that the board needs to understand as we're looking to the evolution of what the district does. And to leave it that vague, I can't believe that you couldn't give us an explanation or a description without,
Sure.
compromising.
I mean, I think I can.
Individual enterprises confidentiality, but this sounds to me like something that the board needs to be made aware of.
Yeah, I mean, in this instance, I think I can say at least as much as they're using much less paper for end user consumption. So more people on tablets, less people.
Okay. All right.
So that kind of answers the question.
All right.
Yeah. All right, great.
So John,
Yeah.
yeah, my question, John, was, are you able to tease out any impact of the bag ban, the grocery store bags, the shopping bags, but when with the increase, now you got to pay 5 cents to have a bag, and all of us are encouraged to bring our own bags. Volume wise, I wouldn't think it'd be necessarily that much, but certainly has had an impact. And the overarching issue is perhaps we are heading into an age of less packaging. And so the question is, are you seeing that?
That specifically, I don't know if I'd be able to discriminate. But there are a lot of factors as the state and the economy changes. I was just thinking today, what impact does an aging population have on our economy and on our consumption and disposable patterns? So that's something else that may be coming more into play as the years go by here in the next decade or so. There's a lot of things that could come into play that change things. It's been pretty much trends have been tacked to population growth, trending with population growth over the years. I suspect generation will increase with population growth over time, but there may be some countervailing forces, and it is hard to pin the stuff down. I have sort of very general information at my fingertips, and getting at specific consumer goods or business practices is a little bit beyond what I'm capable of doing.
Marty, your hand is up.
Yeah, this is a question like some others that have been asked, but I'm wondering whether you get from, for instance, supermarkets, any data on the plastic bags that they collect. For instance, you do. Okay, Amazon is doing a good job.
Of course, everything's reported in mass, so plastic bags don't weigh very much. And so that's one of the tricky parts about this report and about a diversion rate as a metric. It's based on mass, so the heavy materials weight the scale.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Is there any more questions?
So please proceed.
All right. So clean wood, I was just going to mention that the McNeil Generating Station took in about 82% of total generated wood. We take in all of our own facilities wood now at the organics diversion facility. We talked about the food residuals being impacted by the estimates for backyard composting. Although I wanted to point out the longer term trends, 5 to 10 years, organics diversion has grown about 4.5% annual as an average annual growth rate for the last 10 years. So there's been a steady trend of organics diversion that we've witnessed over the last decade, which is encouraging. And also, in part to Alan's comment, textiles definitely are up this year again. So that appears to be having an impact. Again, I mentioned earlier, our diversion rate was a little bit lower than it was the year prior, but again, it sort of meets that 50% threshold that the state has put forth as a statewide goal. So again, that's the amount of material that we kept out of the landfill over all the refuse that we have disposed of in the course of the year. And how does that compare with the country and other cities in the country? Well, unfortunately, the most recent U.S. statistic I'm still able to get is 2018 for the United States, and that's 32%. So we're considerably higher than that. The most recent diversion report, which I just got my hands on today, frankly, for Vermont, that's for the year 2022. They did just release it this year, but the diversion rate reported there is around 41%.
Not go into the landfill.
And as far as what are usually considered higher performing cities are better.
Leslie, could you mute, please?
Have you got anything done?
Yeah, that's good.
No.
So Seattle, San Francisco, and Portland, the Portland metro area are generally considered high performing communities. We're in line with those areas. Of interest, the Solid Waste Association of North America Applied Research Foundation published an article or a study this summer about, we did a sort of a deep dive into Seattle's programs. But one comment I found interesting in that report was that they had noted that diversion rates for the best performing cities had been relatively flat for the last few years. And one of the challenges they pointed out was improving the diversion practices that occur at multifamily residential housing. And that's something I think that resonates with our staff as well, that it's been difficult in larger apartment complexes to get the same performance in organics, composting, and single stream recycling. Just one of the challenges that I think face not only us, but many areas of the country. So this next slide highlights what we would call our maximum MSW diversion rate. So this is essentially the total tons that we did divert plus the tons that we could have diverted, but we know we disposed over total generation. So this is sort of the ideal. The ideal would be 80%. We're about 2/3 of the way there. So obviously not perfect, but making some good progress over the years, and hopefully we'll continue an upward trend as we grow our compliance and education programs, and as we are able to achieve better sorting methods on the materials that we receive. As far as greenhouse gas emissions, that material that we do divert from the landfill has the equivalent of reducing our metric tons of carbon dioxide to about the tune of about 158,000 metric tons. So that's significant. It's the equivalent of taking about 34,000 cars off the road. Taking a closer look at construction and demolition, again, as I'm sure you're all aware, there's been plenty of construction in the area, Burlington High School, downtown, and a number of larger housing projects in suburban areas, and that's all contributing to an uptick in disposal. Diversion is also up, and you'll see a considerable amount of material is diverted. However, I want to point out that, again, this is where the more massive material sort of puts a finger on the scale for us in terms of a diversion rate. That asphalt and concrete recycling really amount to the largest portion of that diverted material, and that's just sort of the way the EPA and cities and states have been looking at C&D diversion. It always has included the aggregates, which are often banned from the landfill as they are here. So you have to keep in mind that there's a smaller increment of actual material being diverted that is C&D based, like wood and cardboard and clean or painted wood and scrap metal and so on. And to be honest, those numbers have always been sort of middling. We had some attempts at recycling, C&D recycling specific facilities. As you will recall, there was a problem finding a market for asphalt shingles in the not so distant past. And we also have noticed that clean wood has dropped as an output from those streams as well. So definitely room for improvement. The numbers are a little bit, I wouldn't say misleading, but they're hard to follow sometimes when you have material as heavy as road construction materials. And so the diversion rate actually increased this year, and our maximum diversion rate, similar to MSW, hovers around 80%. Alternative daily landfill cover. This is material, if you're not familiar with it, it's a material that's approved by the state. Usually is composed of contaminated soil that's not hazardous. And this is used for covering the open face of the landfill during the course of operations at the end of the day to minimize the garbage flowing or avoid fires and eliminate vectors such as the animals or birds from moving material from out of the landfill itself. This is highly variable. It really depends year to year. If there's a project that maybe is excavating a large amount of soil, say the bike path, that might be somewhat contaminated. So it's one of those contributors to the landfill that is hard to put your finger on it. It could be up or down in any given year. Taking a look at a historical perspective, the slide here gives us a look at the trends of both diversion and disposal. The blue line being MSW disposal, and you can see, or diversion rather, and you can see that upward trend over the last 10 years. Similarly, C&D, you can see that bump between 2016 and 2019. That's when we had a couple of C&D recycling facilities come online, and then a drop during the pandemic, and then sort of an upward swing again, although keeping in mind that is a lot of that material is aggregate. And then you can also just see that the disposal of C&D also has been tracking upwards over time, following population growth, essentially. This is just the same information, but I put it in a stacked line graph so you could see the aggregate amount of disposal and recycling as it stacks up to total generation. And I thought that's a sort of helpful way of looking at the former, the same data. It just gives you a more holistic perspective. You'll see it dips a little bit at the end of the graph in 2023. And again, we've had sort of level generation for a couple of years, the last 3 years. I wouldn't necessarily call that a trend. And I suspect that, you will see that graph tracking back upwards as we continue to add population, although that still, of course, is in the future, and a good chance I could be proved wrong on one or many points. For disposal rates, in terms of pounds per capita per day, you can see MSW dropping and C&D rising, as you would expect. And our diversion rates for MSW slowly rising over time. So again, this report is not the most exciting in terms of changes in numbers, but you get to see those sort of longer term trends playing out. C&D has remained more or less flat over the 10 years you see the slight gain. The recovery rates for our targeted materials, blue bin recyclables, single stream, we saw a slight decrease this last year. Part of that's impacted by the commercial business reporting data that I mentioned before. And then combined with organics, where there was also not an insubstantial drop, but that could be explained by, in part, some of the anomalies in data, but also that we did see a drop in feedstocks arriving at our own compost facility as well. In terms of what actually ends up at the landfill, we're able to interpolate essentially those components that we know end up in the landfill that could have been recovered. And so that out of 123,000 tons or so amounts to almost 61,000 tons of potentially recoverable material. So there's room to grow, obviously, or room to make progress on. This picture has stayed relatively static over the last 3 years. But at the same time, it seems that, given the current trends of population growth, I would expect our new policies such as an improved MRF and our ban of organic material from the landfill, I'm hoping that those proportions will narrow over time and we'll see more materials being diverted from the landfill. But that's contingent on holding the line with our current education, improving enforcement, looking into some of the problem areas that we know about, and finding markets for recyclable materials, as well as improving the facilities we have. So that pretty much wraps up what I have tonight. Is there any more questions?
So John, I have a question. I'm staying with this chart. The first impression is if we're to make improvements, it's clearly on the organics side. That of course jumps out. I'm not really looking to get deep into that. I think there are a lot of challenges. Personally, I think there are a lot of challenges, certainly at the homeowner level, to improve this and increase it. But the next one I jump over is the recoverable C&D, and I think that that's a relatively small number of generators, I would think. But I might be wrong, but is that an opportunity to work with a smaller cohort of people producing this material to see how that could be goosed up, that the diversion rate could be goosed up?
Yeah, I mean, and there's probably others in the room who can speak better to this than I, but I think in large part it really hinges on markets and finding those markets for the materials that can be recovered. I know that's been a challenge with shingling for certain. We still see a significant amount of drywall that's being diverted, but maybe there are more opportunities with materials like clean wood, for instance. I don't know, Jen or Sarah, do you have any insight that you could pass along in that department?
Well, I think part of that too is having more people out on the streets and in the ground, right? So this is part of what Joey and Ethan are going to be looking for, those opportunities to be able to help folks who are generating this material understand both, what is required and then what is possible. And then where they are looking for assistance in finding markets, then that can come back to Jen's outreach team, who can do some of that research, and Becky also does some of that research and help locate potentially markets or where there aren't any. And maybe the state feels that there are, we can bring that information back to say, we want to do more of this diversion. However, we're finding that these markets don't realistically exist. So part of it is getting out there and talking to folks. And that's one of the reasons Joey's here.
And I'll just add that the thing that strikes me after food scraps is the blue bin recyclables, because we've had mandatory recycling for blue bin materials in place since 1993. And so this should be well ingrained in our public. And the C&D is a little tricky. It kind of fools you with this graph because, as John pointed out, a lot of the C&D is very heavy. So in terms of volume, what's filling up our landfill, that sliver is probably not as large as the blue bin recyclables that are
or the organics, right? So yeah. And for folks who really want to nerd out the details, the state does have in their 2022 waste composition study a great chart. It's table 2-1, which is the detailed composition of aggregate MSW, and it goes into detail of all the different categories. There were 72 categories that they sorted. And it gives a percentage of what was estimated to be in the MSW. And actually, if anyone is interested, we can certainly send that around, but it's in that report. Also, it's a 300-page report, so it's on page 37, 2-1, don't have to go through the whole thing. And it gives you, for example, Paul, you had mentioned plastic bags, and one of the categories they sorted for was film-retail bags, which would be the grocery sacks, which are just shy of 300 tons, so 0.1% of total in the landfill are those retail bags. So yeah, well, kind of gets also to when we talk about what are the items, the products, materials that we are looking at trying to divert. We do utilize this information from the state, and we utilize our own surveys, our own information to say, what are some of the items that are being generated in a decent enough amount, whether it's by weight or by volume, which we can find a market for on a consistent basis, and that can be collected, in the quantity and quality that the markets will want. So we use this information especially to help guide some of those conversations. We'll be talking more about that too in a future board meeting, expanding on that. But yeah, if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, it's kind of a fun thing to look at, and they expanded their categories with this year's sort too. So there's a lot more information in here, and I think they did a pretty good job overall.
Did we see less film plastic at the MRF coming into the MRF after the bag ban, or was it noticeable, or is it just like about the same?
It really wasn't a significant problem for us.
Okay.
Because we've done such a good job over the years of informing residents, businesses that blue bin recycling needs to be loose. So we don't have a large, and didn't before that, a large bag problem at the MRF. So yes, there was, you get them every now and then, and there's been some decrease, but more often the issue with film would be things like shrink wrap or overwrap, things that pallet wrap, things like that. And we do have a program for some of that material, which it was a very small program, but it was very successful, and there was a demand for it. So that's what we mean. Like, when we go out to the business community and we say, what are your barriers? What are you struggling with? And I try to identify those materials so we can figure out, is there a program here that will make sense and will have a meaningful, difference. But from the MRF's perspective, the tanglers, and bags would be a tangler. Yeah, it's more things like cables and hoses and other things that will wrap around the ship.
And other question, and this isn't necessarily related to this report, but what's the current state of affairs for the land application of biosolids?
Oh, golly, that's one to dive into. Yeah, so that is.
Is that likely to continue or get?
It's continuing for now.
Yeah.
And it is in heated discussions both at the federal and state level, because of the concerns about PFAS and other forever chemicals, not just PFAS, there's a whole slew of those forever chemicals. So there's a lot of conversation and a lot of pressure to stop land application. There's not a great alternative yet for that. So I think Vermont is doing a good job at taking a measured approach and looking towards science and keeping that in mind. We're looking at Maine and don't necessarily want to repeat those steps. We may end up there, but we don't want to repeat the quickness of that decision, because there have been some consequences to how quickly that was changed. But it is certainly something that is being discussed and debated now.
So sticking with biosolids for a minute, can you just refresh me and perhaps other board members what CSWD's role and involvement is in the biosolids field?
Yeah, it's minimal. It is considered a solid waste. So because we have responsibility for overseeing the management of solid waste generated in Chittenden County, it is on our list of items that we need to be aware of and to have oversight of. We do not actually manage any wastewater treatment facilities. We do not ship or truck transport any biosolids, any sludges anywhere. We do manage the contract that our member communities that have these plants, we manage that for them. So essentially we're the contract manager and the agent for that program. And a few years back, we asked the member communities, member towns, there's fewer than 10, I think it's 8, maybe 7 or 8, who were under that contract, if they wanted us out of it, because they do pay us a small administrative fee to manage the contract. We handled the billing on their behalf for between Cassell and member towns. And they said, no, we like that you're our one point of contact and that you can send out the RFP and you can manage that process. So we're in year 1, going into year 2, I believe, of the 5-year contract. So we'll ask them again, see what they would like us to do. But things may change.
And that's what I was wondering about, what are
over
we
the
gonna do with
course-
it if it has to change?
Yeah,
And
over the
then
course
do
of this
that.
contract, likely things will change. So by the end of the current one,
That's still going to Chateauguay.
yes, the late application is still going to Chateauguay in New York. Correct. Right.
How about shrink wrap film?
Yeah, so that's like pallet wrap or even
Boats, I'm thinking. of.
boats. So there are different types of that kind of film. So there's marine wrap, boat wrap. There's ag film, which is very similar. There is pallet wrap. There's over wrap, which are things like around bulk packs of toilet paper or paper toweling. They each need to be managed a little differently. And they each have a little bit of a different, potentially a different market. We're trying to find where they can have the same customer, maybe even like if it's like the one customer who receives all the material and then they do what they need to do with it, that would be ideal. Because then we could aggregate all that material from one customer and it would make, billing easier, it would be making shipping easier, but that's been hard to find. So, but yes, marine wrap and ag film it is on the radar for sure.
We've been asking a lot of questions here in the meeting room. Are there folks on Zoom who would have a question?
Yeah,
Leslie?
I had a question. A lot of this, as your description is driven by available markets, but we have an internal market for clean wood, as I understand. The organics facility now has capacity for wood processing, right?
Yes.
Is there an opportunity to somehow connect clean wood like pallets with the organics facility? This is just something for the staff to think about. We have no expertise. This is just a wild and crazy idea, but it's a material for which we have a use and for which we don't have to worry about what the markets are doing because we are the market.
Right, and I think I will not commit Dan to anything in the moment because Dan is certainly the expert far more than any of us in the room, certainly more than I am. And I know that he has some concerns with pallets. Some of the concerns are nails and heavy-duty staples, so we need to make sure that we're obviously being able to pull out 100% of the metal out of them. Depending on what they're made from, they would have to be made from truly clean wood and not at all treated, not at all painted, stained, etc. So
I'm not worried about pallets specifically. I'm just talking about big heading clean wood, whatever clean wood is, making a connection to the organics facility. That would be a little project that should be hypothetically possibly solvable.
Sure, and where it's, where the clean wood meets Jan's specifications, absolutely, we would want to welcome that to the facility. So I think it certainly is something for Dan to keep on the radar, which I know he has, been trying over the years. He's been with us over 15 years, trying to figure out how to get some of that material back into the process without also now then adding additional costs, additional wear and tear, contamination, et cetera. So the short answer to your question, Leslie, is yes, we do want to find ways to divert that material where at all possible, and especially now that we have the ability for shredding.
If you wouldn't mind.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for John, Sarah, or other staff related to the diversion report?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Bryn.
Without having looked at the recent state D&D, how's CSWD comparing relatively to the rest of the state?
Yeah, so I mentioned that back a few slides. I think that the state's current diversion rate was around 41%, and so ours is about 10% higher, essentially.
Well, the state's diversion rate includes us, so
Right. Yeah, I mean,
probably 20 points higher than the rest of the state.
right, yeah, you're sort of dimensioning your data there, so we are part of it. Good point.
And a follow-up question, Jen, can you just give us a reminder, or Sarah, where we are with packaging EPR, extended producer responsibility?
There are 5 states now that have passed EPR for packaging, which is great. We are sitting back and watching California, Oregon, Maine, Colorado, and seeing how well they do it before we move forward with doing anything in Vermont.
Okay.
When you say we, it's the state, not CSWD.
Yeah, Vermont before, I know that there's no, in terms of the solid waste districts, the SWMMEs, there's not a big push for legislation. The Agency of Natural Resources is not looking at that very seriously either. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And I think we will benefit from these other states that are implementing EPR for packaging, because there is an incentive for producers to make their packaging more readily recyclable, compostable is probably a bad example, but more environmentally beneficial or friendlier. And so when you have a state like California, that's a huge part of the marketplace. So we would anticipate seeing and know a lot of the designers of packaging are moving towards packaging that's more recyclable for that reason.
And each of the states that has enacted extended producer responsibility for packaging has done it differently from each other. So there are components of each law that are intriguing and bear watching and studying. So I think Jen's right. I think we do want to sit back a little bit and wait and see how some of the implementation rolls out. California has a very aggressive timeline, so even before some of the other states, even though they passed it sooner, kind of get going, portions of California's law will be in place by the end of next year. So they're very, very aggressive, and so there won't be long to wait. Within the next 3 years, we'll have a lot more information, and again, see where things might be headed. There are also 15 to 19 other states that either have bills pending, keyed up, ready to go. So within the next 10 years, it's quite possible there'll be at least 15 states that have this legislation.
Great, thank you.
Stay tuned.
Any other questions or discussion? I continue to be astounded by the level of detail. There's just so much information that is captured, and it's excellent information. It's not just taking material and putting it someplace. There's every step along the way we're capturing valued information. That's the old adage, you can't control what you don't measure. So having this data is exceedingly important and appreciated, not only for staff, but also for those people who have to provide the reports. And I'm sure they don't always appreciate having to generate this information, but it really does have a beneficial impact and will in the future. Thank you all. Thank you, John, for crunching all this stuff. I'm sure you had a lot of fun. And thank you for trying to make it simple and straightforward for us. Moving on, we now have a quorum present. Confirmed that we're in good shape, and I would like to cycle back then to the consent agenda and deal with that, because among some of the items in there is the ORF contamination policy revisions. I'm sure it would be appreciated if we could act on that tonight to get those revisions in place. So I'm moving back then to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. Are there any requests to remove an item from the consent agenda for further discussion? Hearing none, the consent agenda will be approved as presented in the board packet. We have gone through many of the items on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is an executive session for real estate transactions. We do have a quorum present, so if we could have a motion read into the record to enter into executive session.
I do have that for me.
You have it, oh, good.
Motion that the board of the Chittenden Solid Waste District go into executive session to discuss real estate negotiations where premature general public knowledge would clearly place the district, its member municipalities, and other public bodies or persons involved at a substantial disadvantage, and to permit authorized staff to be present for the session.
So move, South Burlington.
Seconded at 6.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we enter into executive session. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The abstentions? We will now enter into executive session by turning off the recording, closing our doors.
And Logan, if you're still there, there will be no action.
Recording stopped.
There'll be no action taken as a result of executive session, so you're free to